What I'm going to do now is ask my fellow presenters here to briefly introduce themselves and also talk about the elephant in the room, I guess, which is leadership during the current crisis. And then once we've done with that, we'll get on to wider kind of design level leadership issues as well. So I'm going to invite Kevin first. Kevin.
All right, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. This is Kevin. There may be some delay since I'm dialing in from all the way halfway around the world. But assume that you guys are able to hear me. I am the Chief Product Officer at eBay Korea, so the division of the eBay Inc. in San Jose. My experience has been all over the world, from different countries to different industries. You guys can all check that out in my LinkedIn. But I'm very much enjoying what I do at the moment, being able to transition from a typical design realm of the business to something much greater or broader from a business perspective. In terms of the leadership, I guess, quality that you will be seeking, especially in the times of like COVID-19, for me, one word that summarizes trust. We're from social distancing, not only from a physical point of view, but also from a geographic, from a Zoom or Skype or whatever the means that you have. So there you are for the first time, not able to see people, face to face, but through the camera, and knowing that whether they're going to get the work done or whether they're off the camera, you would wonder what are they doing. So I think as a leadership or leaders, you will have to place a trust in humanity that they will do the best they can to do what they need to do. So I think that's the one word that I would summarize that was required, especially at times like this.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, I think trust is a massive thing at the moment. Lauren, can I invite you to introduce yourself? Your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, as the guys know, I am having some fantastic technical issues myself. So if I cut out or just leave a weird frozen face on screen, I apologize to everyone, but let's keep going. My background, actually, I trained as a visual designer, worked in a ton of different digital, creative and integrated agencies, doing a lot around e-com, but also doing things like interactive films, coffee table books, spatial experiences and stuff. I just really love design. And I joined PwC about 18 months ago now to actually create, shape and build the design capability there. So we specifically work with PwC clients. So we take strategic challenges, a little bit like what Kevin was saying. I actually moved from a very design focus into a very kind of broader organizational business focus. I don't know if that's maybe because designers can be a little OCD from time to time and you just want like all of it. But we do everything from redesigning train stations to building new healthcare products. So it's been a fascinating experience. I think from my point of view, I'm going to come at this slightly differently in the sense that what we're setting up is ultimately a startup, within a consultancy. So we've got a lot of those sort of feelings. So for me at the moment, it's maintaining a sense of our strategy and vision, but empowering everyone to be part of that journey. And sometimes, like right now, you've got to be part of the journey at a distance. So to Kevin's point, I completely agree on the trust aspect. I think it's knowing how to support people, from their responsibilities with childcare, families, illnesses and everything. And part of that's just being open and honest. So the level of vulnerability that you just have to let yourself go sometimes to the people and just say, look, this is what we're doing from a strategy and vision point of view. This is where I need support because, we can't do this alone. And I just find that particular angles very effective.
Great, thank you very much, Lauren. And finally, Jack. Hey, Jack.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I guess it's morning for me here in the US and it's the evening for Kevin in Korea. So good way to start the day for me. It's lovely to be here. And I've really spent the past several years of my career at Duolingo here in the US, mainly focused on designing a system that helps students in developing countries get access to a college education, mostly in the United States. And most of what I'm trying to focus on right now during all of this, the elephant in the room, as John mentioned, is not necessarily what is happening to us, but what we can do about it. While the former, what's happening, is what's in the news, obviously what we can do about it is what we as individuals can choose to focus on and support each other on. And I was saying to someone the other day, you know, I think the quality of your life is really in the quality of your questions. And so that you shouldn't choose to, or you shouldn't strive to have no problems. You should just strive to have better ones, right? And we have a very big problem to deal with right now, and we can deal with it all together. And so while most of you may agree, I think we often feel like we are focusing, whether it's in our jobs, on our lives, not necessarily on what's most important, but what is just most urgent. And I think this is our chance to actually change that and really reconsider things and really focus on what's most important, whether that be just having empathy for each other, trying to treat each other the right way, or just trying to do our best work. I think it's our chance to change that, focusing on what's most important. And I'll never pretend like I have all the answers with people. I think that's a good thing. But I do believe that for most great creatives, they are most comfortable in a place where they have more questions than they have answers for. And I think that's exactly where we are right now. So we're just working through it with the right intentions and trying to do some good.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Jack. I think you know, as designers and people who are or aspire to be human-centered, I think having that empathy, having that longer-term kind of vision on goals, trust, those are all aspects that we need to bring to the fore. Okay, I want to kick off now with, I guess, a kind of open question now. Authentic leadership and what this means. I'm going to throw this over to Kevin. First, your thoughts about this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's also the question that I take it to my heart every day, because I'm not as good as I wanted to be. But, you know, for me, authentic, I mean, I like to put a disclaimer by saying I'm going to be a little bit provocative of my answering the question. I think we as a creator community, let's put a creator community as a noun for all of us who are in this, you know, room, 30-some people all together. We're creative in one way or the other, whether from a design or product or, you know, service. But I think we also tend to become quite arrogant without knowing it, because we think we have all the answers. Because to Jack's point, we do ask a lot of good questions. And by asking smart questions, you think you're smarter, or you think you're having some answers that people don't have, whether it's product development, even an executive of leadership team. But I often ask myself this question, I ask the team this question: would any discipline alone can develop and launch a product and service? And answer, as you all know, is no. So I think it's all about learning what you bring to the table, but at the same time, which that takes a bit of a courage and a bit of a assertive, bring the humility at the same time, to knowing that you don't have all the answers. You have to look to the people next to right to find the answers. And I think that's the most difficult, but I think when you balance those two, you tend to show what I call best of authentic leadership that people are looking for, especially in the current time where no single person in the room can solve COVID-19. And you need everybody to come together under one agenda. And doesn't matter if Democratic or Republican, or you come from one country to another continent, you have a one common goal. And I think that requires everyone to acknowledge through authentic leadership that I don't have all the answers, but I can have an answer if I know how to work with the people.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. Just before I throw that to the other guys, I forgot to mention to all the attendees that there is a Q&A tab on should be on your right-hand side, I believe, which is your opportunity to ask questions for the second part of this. So for the first 30 minutes or so, I'll be asking some of the questions, but it's really your opportunity to ask questions as well. So keep one ear listening to us all, hopefully, and the other bit of your brain, I guess, typing in the Q&A. And for everyone else monitoring the Q&A as well, there's the ability to vote up questions that you think are particularly pertinent and that you would like answered by the panel as well. So please do make use of that. Otherwise, you'll be hearing a lot more of my questions rather than your questions. So it'd be better if we answer your questions. So please do make use of that facility. Okay. So same question. I'll go to Jack this time. Authentic leadership and what that means from your perspective.
Sure. Well, I think great creative work often comes from the people that feel like they have something to say. And they're often not the people that you might expect. And many of them may not say anything at all unless they feel like you're willing to listen. So one great thing that our leadership has done is well, give people a say. What a marvelous thing, right? What a revelation. But it really is something where we structure it. And what we do every single week with the entire design and product team is we do three things. We do critiques, showcases, and workshops. Crits are for feedback on things that you're working on. So that's feedback from your peers. Showcases are just what you've done recently that's working, a little bit less of a back and forth and more presentational. And workshops are a chance for us to get together and solve problems as a team. Those could be product problems, those could be organizational problems, those could be rebuilding the team, many, many different things. And that means that it's really giving people a say. It's not top down, it's very flat. So it gives everyone on the team a chance to develop and step up into the roles and the responsibilities that they feel like they would like to have a say in. And one of the things we did when all of this started and when we started working from home is we actually decided to take the last one, those workshops where we're solving organizational product problems, and actually shift them to just focusing more on getting to know each other. So we did one last week that was actually a show and tell, like literally what you would do as a kid in school where you bring a thing and you show everyone and tell them a story about it. And it sounds ridiculous, but it really was enlightening. So we actually found out that one of our newest designers is actually a master potter. She creates like hundreds of pieces of incredible pottery, things that you'd want to buy and pay a lot of money for. Talent we had no idea that she had, hundreds of amazing pieces. Then we had someone else who is a master chef and actually went to culinary school and helped open a bunch of great local restaurants that we all go to and enjoy. We had no idea. And he showed us and really took us through all of these different cooking equipment and how it's used and what pots and pans you can buy for different reasons, which probably sounds boring. And it was totally enlightening because there were things we just had no idea about. He's really speaking from the perspective of a chef, not a designer. And the last one was a former semi-professional baseball player who actually has his own real tradable baseball card with his photo on it and everything. So these things can seem a little frivolous at first, transitioning our more formal processes designed to give people a say into just getting to know each other during all of this crisis. But I think it's really made us a stronger team. So it's been great.
Great, thanks for that. And Lauren, over to you.
I think from my point of view, I would say that I have entered a situation where in my life we get 360-degree feedback on almost like a daily, if not like weekly basis. And I landed in that environment very much from a previous agency environment where you'd be lucky to get a bit of feedback, once maybe a quarter of like, hey, just keep going and doing what you're doing. So I think for me, what's been really important is that you need to listen to the voices around you, and you need to take on board people's opinions and all of those sort of things. But I'd really urge people to understand who they are and spend some time maybe on understanding what your core values are as a leader, and even just as purely as an individual. I think that if you listen too much sometimes to everyone's voices around you, you can get pulled in so many different directions and you lose that authenticity of yourself. So for me, like being an authentic leader isn't the same thing for everyone. That's kind of what I know Kevin and Jack saying, like everyone's got their different flavors and everyone's got their different styles and approaches. So just don't forget that you are a human. It's you in the middle there. You know, you need to be authentic to what you believe in and what you're passionate about, and take on board what other people say, but don't just go out there trying to do what they're saying without taking, you know, consideration and thought.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just echoing that, I think that's something very much I've found as I've grown from being an ex-academic into a company of 2, into a company of 45 or whatever. It was a big shock over quite a long time. Whilst seeking often to understand and take on you know, the comments and the opinions of peers, there's still a requirement to be a leader ultimately, and someone to make decisions, and it's not always the group thing that can go through that. And being authentic to yourself, and also, you know, leaning on things like values also helps to explain and have that common purpose, but not necessarily all the common opinions. Someone in the end as a leader has to make the decisions, and sometimes they're tough. Sometimes they can be difficult. Talking about that, and I guess mirroring, somewhat my evolution from non-leader to being a CEO, whether I like it or not. Can we talk about the transition from a creative, which is probably what we all started off as, and many of our audience are or were, and how that transition has happened from creative or designer into now a business leader. Lauren, can we start with you this time?
Yeah, sure. So I think, yeah, being open and honest, I think it's been a journey for me. I think there's been some real clear positives that have come out of this transition, and then some drawbacks, which I could go into, but all learnings. I think, you know, in the past, there's been I used to do a lot around service design and brand strategy. So a lot of what myself and the team were doing, we wanted to go in, we could see challenges or concerns within organizations or the way teams were working to deliver stuff, but we never really had the permission to go in and actually provide that advice for them. And so for me, sometimes it was quite frustrating on that level. And in accompaniment with that, we'd often do pieces around, you know, mapping a digital ecosystem, making it more human-centered, you know, bringing all those principles to life without actually understanding that it would have contained a lot of organizational culture changes, or, you know, potentially the hiring or firing of people, right? That, you know, and you don't really think about it because, you know, for me anyway, I was in a bubble of more of a creative agency where you're building experiences for end users. And so for me right now, having the ability to apply our creative thinking and creative strategy to some really big challenges that don't start off as creative challenges at all, you know, and don't start off as brand challenges. They're pure business challenges. Being able to go in there and solve those problems is incredibly fascinating, and being able to see our skills applied to that, and knowing that we can actually affect real change at the end is also incredibly rewarding. I think some of the challenges that I've had is, after working for so long in the creative industry, you find yourself sometimes going into a scenario where you either have no idea what anyone is saying in the room, even though you wanted a seat at the table, you get the seat at the table and you're like, what? Like, why are people looking at me for like op models? I'm like, I don't know that. And then the other aspect to it is sometimes you still have to prove out the value of what you do. And you're like, you know the value and you know the team value, but you have to kind of drive it into understanding the business value of what you're doing. So I think, you know, we're in a much better position right now and being able to articulate that. But that for me was one of the biggest learnings. Like, how do we maintain that level of creativity that you need to have, which is somewhat chaos, combined with a level of method and process, which you know that the company is going to understand. And it's kind of been a roller coaster, but we're definitely getting there.
Great, thank you. And I guess that's one aspect of that is fully understanding the context of use and the feasibility, and also the business imperative around design as well. And what I find is quite often, people who are new into the field are caught in the bright lights of great design and want to design the best. And often that means kind of things that are aesthetic, things that have a great experience, which are all things to, of course, aim for. But then not understanding what wheels have to move to make all of those things happen. And they're often very disappointed that their vision doesn't get out in there into the wild, because actually there's a whole business and an infrastructure that has to implement that eventually. And I think that's part of design, and that's part of leadership. It's part of understanding all of that, I guess, as well. So we've got 3 questions now in the Q&A, which is great. 2 of them are similar to this question that we're asking at the moment. So hopefully we're answering those. If you guys in the audience can think of more and add those, that would be great. But I'll throw the same question over to Jack, please.
Sure. I think much of what we do at Duolingo is metrics driven. We became the most popular education app in the world, so we have many hundreds of millions of people that use Duolingo. And we do many thousands of tests every week to try and improve the experience. And one of the things our founders said at the very beginning is that we don't just want to have a sustainable, good business. We also want to do good for the world. It's actually very important that we do both at the same time, not just one or the other necessarily, if we want to survive for 100 years or longer and do as much as we can. So we do think we can do both. Now, to Lauren's earlier point, I mean, getting buy-in from execs, business units, the executive team, it really means learning how to speak a different language as a creative, which is funny for me to say at a language company. But I think it really just means, boiling it down and trying not to get overwhelmed by it. It means seeking to understand first, then to inform, which can be difficult to do if you've been quite successful in your career in the creative field. To your earlier point, you may think you actually have lots of the answers, and you must figure out actually that you don't, and you have to learn an entirely new skill set again and learn how to speak that different language. And so because much of what we do is so metrics driven, that means you can at least focus in on those metrics, something you may not have been looking at before as a creative. You can say, okay, show me the dashboard, show me the data, show me where everything's going, how the tests work. Let me be really metrics driven, data driven in doing this, and try and get that second half of the brain working. And that lets you frame all of your creative solutions, your crazy big bets, the things that you just want people to let you try. Just let me try this. Trust me, it'll work. You can rationalize that oftentimes in the numbers, and you can at least say, well, let me test it and I'll measure it. And you can then put a number on that and prove that it's worked. And I think that, acknowledging that much of what you do is focused on building a strong and sustainable company. If your leadership and the other executives around you know that you are focused on the core business, know that you are focused on making it sustainable and making it strong, you are more likely to get someone to let you take a risk because you are rationalizing what you're doing all of the time. You're putting it in their language. That helps build that trust that Kevin was talking about. Then the other leaders can look at you and say, well, they're always on the ball. They speak my language. They know what matters. But in this instance, I'm going to let them take a chance because they're so solid everywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking the language.
I think that was Alana's question, wasn't it? There's someone in the Q&A that was asking exactly that, Jack, but you perfectly answered, which is ultimately like identify a key metric, whether it's an internal KPI that they have around revenue, retention, reputation, obviously a huge amount of subsets underneath that, but something that is in their language, and then design the future experience in order to have a positive impact on the performance of that metric. How you do it is the methodology around human-centered design, obviously, but you don't use that as the way of actually entering the conversation and then proving it out afterwards. I use that all the time as well.
Kevin, do you want to come in on that? Kevin? Would you like to come in on the same question? So moving from designer to business leader.
Yeah, I've been just listening mode, so forgot to answer the question. Uh, um, this is a really great question, and I do have lots of feedbacks and questions and answers, but I kind of narrow it down to this like 4 or 5 how sort of like a make a jump. One is from my experience, I always try to learn how to think like deep and wide. And oftentimes it's been viewed by your colleagues as a weirdo, abnormal, because when you're at that level, when you have to just execute, right? Thinking broad is not in their vocabulary. It's almost like, no, that's not your job to think broad. You just have to execute. But my first lesson learned is doesn't matter whether you're entry level or whether you're executive, you always have to think and know how to think big and deep. The second thing is also going along with this, we talk about human-centered design thinking is a silver bullet. As someone who actually done many years and even, ushering a new, era in major companies, it's just a approach. It's not the answer. It's just approach that sometimes it does work. Sometimes you have to know how to tone it down or tone it up. So also second lesson is how to flex your muscle so that you can actually cover the both tactical execution projects or initiative that adds value to it at the same time, called upon a larger scale project that you don't see the end of it, that you just have to approach that in a manner. And then third thing, which I always talk to everyone, which is the most hard, is you got to think like CEO. You can't just think like your next level, design manager, or I want to be a product leader, or I want to be a CPO, whatever, or CEO as an experience officer. No, you got to go all the way to the D capital CEO, because once you're at that level of thinking, you don't have to have all the answers, but you have to think like, why would my president or CEO will make such a horrified decision? And when you look at that from that angle, then you can still be able to find your contribution level. And I think that's the most difficult part, that switching from a, say, creative discipline to the less creative discipline, as people may call it, although I highly argue that it is still creative, is that you have to think like that CEO level. Then transition becomes much easier. And the fourth thing is, I think Jack and Lauren touched on this one, but you got to be constantly curious about just things. You can't just be curious about your discipline. I often see a lot of designers fail to make a next jump because they're so focused on nitpicking pixel level something. Don't get me wrong, it's very important for building a product, but building a product can be done by someone else. If you're creative minds and creative discipline, you got to put to that skill set in the best way possible. And that doesn't come from the pixel perfecting. It comes from problem solving. So I think it's really about be curious about other discipline, learn as much as you can. There are enough access of those help nowadays online within the company. So always ask people to do that. And then last thing is, as much as I hate to say, it's a timing. When I look at my career, there has been a perfect moment or timing where I had to jump because opportunity is so ripe that I just didn't want to miss it, or opportunity just came along that you didn't expect. But either way, you sometimes have to place your future sometimes in the luck, or not a luck, but timing fashion, that you do know when to make the jump. So if you make a premature jump, you'll be regretting. But if you make a little bit too late conservative decision to make a jump, you'll be still leave it up to how the stay tuned to what's going on around you, and talk to your people, talk to your network, because they will sometimes tell you exactly when to make the move. And that's, again, back to the first question of trust. Sometimes yourself is not the most trusted source. It is actually the one that giving you the wrong information. So you got to talk to people, network, like this event. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. I think aligned to an amount of that is and what a number of you said, is speaking the right language, not aspiring just to the next level, and actually aspiring to have a seat at the top table. A number of you have said. I hear quite a lot, questions such as, and I think there have been some here in the chat as well, about how do we get them to listen about the importance of design? How do we get them to listen about the importance of experience? Why is there a chief financial officer, a chief marketing officer, and not a chief insert whatever your design officer or experience officer or whatever else should be? So I think we predicted, the prominence of a chief experience officer like 15 years ago, and it didn't happen. It hasn't happened. It's just kind of happening, maybe somewhere, sometimes. Yet we also go into other organizations which, in terms of, whatever you choose to call it, but the user experience maturity or usability maturity level or design maturity level is so low that those kind of things are not going to happen for a long, long time. And depending on who you speak to, the evolution of that becoming important, actually having any influence on the top table of decisions and strategy, is going to be years. And I think that's accelerated somewhat in so what are your perspectives on that? So I guess the prominence of experience design, human-centered design as a discipline, and how that's grown and accelerated over the last few years, and therefore how it can be known as a leadership role, not just this, what is often dismissed as design. It's that pretty thing. It's misunderstood. What are your aspects or your thoughts about that? So we can go to Jack.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think it goes back to a little bit of what we were saying earlier, where it feels like, and to your point, John, it feels like there are almost two worlds. There is the design and their creative world, and there is the business world. And in the design and the creative world, we have our design thinking, we have our experience officers, we have the people we would expect to be able to slot in at the top of the business world, where they can do real good. But instead, there is still somewhat of a thin wall between these two worlds. And I think going back to what I was talking about earlier, I mean, we have the advantage of being super metrics driven as a company at every level. So people at least have some exposure to the core metrics, they understand what they are. And then we have, the experts, and we have the business leaders that really dig into them at a deep level. And then, of course, we have our creatives focused on doing great creative work, with the metrics sort of being the overarching decider on things. But I think it really comes down to, leaders solve problems, right? That's their job. And if you're in the creative industry and you want that seat at the table and you're trying to figure out how to get it, the trick is to figure out how to solve their problems. And you figure that out by asking your leaders, the business leadership, the product leadership, what their problems are, and then building your creative solutions around them every single time. And while I was looking at some of the questions in the Q&A, I think the instinct from a designer is to say, well, let me educate the executive team, let me educate the business leaders in the value of design, let me give them a great presentation on design thinking, let me show them what other companies are doing, and let me also show them how we're not doing any of that and how we should be doing it and we should feel bad about it. I think flipping that might be a good idea, where again, you seek to understand before you inform. So you might just be as simple as sitting down with the person perhaps 2 levels above you, or perhaps you're a creative director and you really should be a chief of design. Perhaps you could go to your executive leadership and ask for them to tell you what their problems are, what the goals are, and explain it to you, like you were 5 even, and then say, okay, well, I'm going to build our creative solutions around those problems. Now, I'm going to help you solve your problems. That's what gets you that more permanent seat at the table, I think, because you are seen then not as the creative, as the person that's going to just go off and do a bunch of great design, because great design is a value in of itself, but they're going to help me solve my problems and it's going to push us all forward. And why wouldn't we want that?
That's awesome. Thanks very much, Jack. Now I'm going to go over to the Q&A now. We've got a couple of questions that are directed. There's one here particularly at Lauren. So this is from Nadia. I really like the thought from Lauren about not letting thoughts and inputs of others lead you away from you. I'd like to know, how do you make sure that you're being an effective leader for your team, your organization, etc.? And how do you deal with imposter syndrome? I think we've all felt that, haven't we? Moments that we all have from time to time. Thank you.
That is a great question. I am not going to have like the answer to everything with that one, because I definitely still suffer from that imposter syndrome sometimes. And I'm definitely in situations where I was working, as a perfect example, with a technology client that specialized in robotics. And I have no background in robotics at all. And I sat at that table and he deferred to me on these points around what he should do with his future robotics company. And I'm like, okay, no idea. So I hear you. I think from my point of view, a couple of years ago, I got some really good advice to develop my values. And I really spent quite a lot of time to come up with 3 values that I hold on to. And they're kind of my personal anchors in a way. You know, once I identified them, it was amazing how many of my past personal experiences were also like based on these values, which was a little bit freaky and probably a conversation for another time. But like I hold on to those values and I try and remember those. I remember that I was hired to do a particular job that, you know, it's a tricky job to begin with. I would not have been hired to do it if I wasn't able to have a voice in the room. And then the other aspect to it is, when it comes down to my team, is the honesty and openness factor. You know, I'm there to essentially allow them to be the best they can be. I'm the guardrails. I'm there to provide a vision. I'm not there to mandate them or micromanage them. And I actually spoke to them at the beginning about my values and who I am and my leadership style. And the way that we're set up means that, you know, I get upward feedback all the time from the team, you know, around things that they like or don't like, which I take on board. And I think that particularly helps me stay true to it. But I think just sometimes you've got to be brave. You know, you've got to kind of sit there and try and learn stuff, but just try and take a brave step forward. You're not going to know everything all the time, and no one is really looking at you to know everything all the time either, which was a surprising learning at some point. But I think it's all of the little decisions that you make along the way, if that helps. I'm not sure who asked it. Was it Nadia? Sorry.
Yeah, Nadia. Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I've just got one perspective on that as well. I think if any of you suffer, and I say suffer in inverted commas, from imposter syndrome, that's actually very healthy. Because if you've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, people who don't suffer from imposter syndrome are usually on the peak of Mount Stupid. They have learnt a little bit and they think they've got all the answers to everything else. With doubt comes wisdom. When you go on the slope of disillusionment and you come on the upslope of enlightenment, and you start to know what you don't know, you accept that with some humility and you open yourself out to more learning. So imposter syndrome is a good thing. It means you're not being flippant about it and you don't think you've got all the answers, because you definitely haven't. And every day is a school day. I think hopefully that's what we're finding today. So let's embrace imposter syndrome, as long as it's not totally out of kilter.
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say last thing, and then I'll stop on that topic. The humility aspect, I think, is really important. I know, Kevin, you picked up on that earlier from a leadership point of view. But I think on top of that, people are surprisingly flattered when you say you don't know something and you ask for their advice. You know, everyone wants to be able to impart their specialist wisdom on someone else. So simply by saying, look, I really don't understand, explain it to me, the response back from people is often incredibly positive. They're like, yeah, sure, no, I'd love to. Oh, you really want to learn about op models? Not really, no one does. But you know, it's like, it's very surprising, and it actually helps build the team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also a great research technique, of course, as well. The whole kind of master apprentice role is a great thing for opening people up generally anyway. Awesome. Okay, we've got one here. I won't attempt to pronounce your name because I'm going to mangle it. I do apologize. What do you think about fake human-centered design that ignores people who are not tech savvy? So fake human-centered design that ignores people who are not tech savvy. I guess that's people focusing just on people who are like them. Kevin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I may just tweak the question and answer differently. Hopefully, still answers your question. Uh, if not, let me know. The human-centered design is such a great thing, but here's a catch 2020, right? The question for all of you. You as a practitioner or somewhat master of this technique, I'm sure you are good at it in terms of analyzing human, in other words, users or customers, and find the problems, insight, and then bring into the design requirement, prototyping it, whatever, the whole 9 yards, right? But have you actually applied human-centered design to understand your stakeholder, understand the developers who you just hate the most, or try to understand the product managers you just despise to see every day because he or she just wouldn't understand what you're saying, or your manager or your peer group's manager who just look at you as total strangers. What are you talking about? I don't understand your language. Just get to work. Do this, what I ask you. I think that's one of those probably relate to this question of, I think we often deal with the able body, able body as in someone who's like us, who have functional body parts, and we can see, we can hear, we can, but I think that also goes with the knowledge. I think that we often try to build our system around people like us. So when they give us a positive feedback through a human-centered design approach, whether it is, design thinking phase or execution or research or, validation, what have you, I think we tend to get attracted towards people who gives us the answer that we are looking for. And so I think it is probably what I would answer that as that's a fake. That's a total shallow practitioner's view of what the human-centered design that they actually, I don't know, picked it up by Googling it. But they don't teach you that at school. So I think that's something that we gotta be very careful. And I think it goes back to the authentic leadership. It goes back to humility. It's not independent concept. I know we talked about leadership as in today's subject, but human-centered design is to me is a foundational fabric of what makes you a leader. If you actually know how to apply authentically. And as someone who transitioned from a design leadership to now product leadership, I'll tell you, I don't think half of the UX or design community as a total does know how to do human-centered design. That's my experience. And it's sad reality today, but don't be deceived by someone who you may be respecting or adore you or whatever. Half of them are fake. They really have a shallow knowledge about human-centered design. And that is one of the problems of design community today, not still having at the seat at the table or not having this chief experience officer title, although you think you want it within your organization, because the CEO sees that through the lens of authenticity, right? And the one thing that I always urge people to be careful is your CEO of your company, whether big, small, large, multinational or, continent of one country, they're much smarter than most of us. They have information coming into their desk every day by different people that you probably don't have access to. And it makes them much more informed and more educated and more decisive about what is and what is not that they have to do. And design or design thinking is one of the vocabulary that they kind of heard about it again. So I think that's where we need to be more authentic because they know just enough to know and tell the difference between what's helpful and what's not helpful for their organization. So that's how would I respond to that question.
Great answer. Thank you very much, Kevin. Do you guys want to come in on that? If not, I'm going to move to Alison's question that's at the top at the moment. They say success is when preparation meets opportunity. Did each of you do anything specific to prepare to transition into management roles? And is there anything you'd wish you'd done before making the jump from a doer to a leader? Great question. Thank you, Alison. Lauren, can we come to you for that one?
I was just having a little bit of a chuckle particularly around the preparation piece. I think Kevin alluded to it a little bit earlier about the decisions from a career point of view, like spotting opportunities and it being part of luck, etc. I think, and it's only being able to look back on my career, but I made some pretty crazy moves based on like gut instinct and the team and what felt right to me at the time. And I think in retrospect, if I'd thought about doing those moves and being prepared, I never would have made the move. Like I would have done too much preparation and then not been able to necessarily either find the role, or it would have been too late. I'm not saying this is necessarily the best career advice. Hey, be erratic and just go for it. But I do think for me personally, a lot of it came down to gut instincts. Now, is there anything I wish I had done? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think that part of what I've gone through has allowed me to learn in ways that I never would have been able to learn prior. Like it would have been a hard thing for me to have necessarily done a lot of prep work. And again, this is just a personal opinion. I just answered a previous question from someone else around the biggest transition for me was ultimately from doing and getting into the detail of designing on a day-to-day basis and having to step back from that. That was my hardest shift. That was actually way harder than moving from a pure design role into being like a founder in a business. And I got great advice from someone at the time years ago to say I needed to transition the love of what I do into the love of what my team does, you know, and I need to find my passion and energy from that. And honest to God, it took me months to try and step back, not because I didn't trust them, because I thought they were incredible, but just because I love design so much. But once I did, I felt like I could step back and tackle strategic challenges, and I felt like the team were more empowered to make decisions, and I was there to be able to guide them, and everything fell a bit more in place. So I'm not sure that's a roundabout way of trying to answer your question, but I think part of it is a journey, part of it's personal, part of it you've got to do on the go, and you'll only encounter those situations.
I love that. I love that phrase you said then, taking the love of, I'm trying to remember it now, the love of what you do and expecting that for your team. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Can I add one more thing to that, what Lawrence said? It's a more of a wacky tactical tip for those who are actually asking a lot of questions about, was there any preparation transition to the management role, whether there's a product or designer within that. One thing that I have done, not necessarily I would recommend, but since this is a session to just share out through authenticity and transparency, most of us do a job hunting when we're at that point of, you know what, now it's time. My experience has been at some point, especially when you are very distracted with this change management of your career, do often invite yourself for those jobs that are open and go for it. Not necessarily as a way of, this is really bad for the employer side, that's why I was really careful, but as someone who wants to prepare, you need to know the DNA. There's no way you will find out the DNA by poking around the internet, talking to some alumni. That's not going to work out. You need to find yourself the experience of what that is. And only way you're going to find out, I'm sorry to say, is to talk to, not recruiter, but getting to the first round of interviewing or interviewed by someone who's actually working there in a very serious conversation about, I'm going to hire you or I'm not going to hire you. Not a coffee chat. That's just a bit of a pretentious coffee chat moment. This is important, but when I found out a lot of guts about company culture, their management style in that interview moment, which I wasn't ready for it, but I went for it just to understand. So that later, like 5 years later or 10 years later, if I really, really want to get to that company, because I see their vision, but I have so many experience not necessarily working out with some of the great company names that you probably heard of that I'm not going to mention today. The reason that we just can't go along together is because as much as I wanted it, as much as they wanted it, the chemistry doesn't there. And sometimes you got to be able to understand to make that transition from management or individual contributor to management is the same thing. It's not something that no one's prepared for it, as Lauren said. But you do also have to do some investigation, effort to understand is that really something what I want? Whether you're just moving from IC role to the management role within design, or design to now something much broader. It is also about transforming yourself. So you got to be able to connect at the chemistry level. It's not just job you're talking about. You're talking about people that are looking up to you, people that are finding every fault of you, at the same time compliment you for everything that you think you've done poorly. So in order to connect with the people, you really have to dig into those level of detail. So, my suggestion on that one is, if you're thinking about moving from IC to management within the company, great, then start really embrace that, talking to different people. But I will also do that with outside company, because once you do that within the company, everyone knows that you're thinking about moving. So, but I think talking to as many different people is a great way to learn whether you are actually ready for or be prepared for. So.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so I suggest we do quite a quick one here. There's a question from Leon. Can you guys give good book advice? I always like a good book reference. So Jack, can we start with you? Some books that have influenced you and might be appropriate for this topic.
Yeah, I think there's probably two categories again, that thin wall that we were talking about. I think on the design side, I started or at least try and constantly revisit all of the classics, books by Paul Rand and the original, Massimo Vignelli, and the kind of what you might consider the founders of graphic design back in the 60s and 70s, at least as it's known now. So I try and read those classics, but then going back to the business side of things, the business and advice books are always kind of regurgitated over and over again. You see the same ones at the top of the list, and I think that's probably a good thing. I think one of them is, a classic one, just building yourself as a person, is obviously How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie. I mean, it's a very good, I think at any level you're at in your life, reading that book, you will probably begin to reconsider some things that you might be doing and see yourself in a little bit of a different light. And then there is I believe it is High Impact Management, I believe. It was by the CEO of Intel. I'm probably getting the name wrong there. But it was by a former CEO of Intel for many, many years. And that's something that most of the executive team and executive teams I've been around read just religiously. And then another one is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, is read by many, many product and design people in Silicon Valley. And it's really, regardless of what you might think around the book, it's the book's advice is quite simple, quite concise, and it provides, I think, a new perspective on some contrarian ideas for building products. It's something that's very popular in product and design circles, but might not bubble all the way into design and UX and those kind of circles. So it's something I'd recommend checking out. Great list.
Lauren, over to you for that same question.
So I think from my point of view, the one that I'm reading at the moment is, you can sense a general theme at the moment, it's called Thanks for the Feedback. And it's basically all about understanding how to take on board feedback, how to absorb it, what to push back on, what to pay attention to, and also how to constructively give people feedback, which I think is kind of crucial. I've always had to give feedback from a design and creative perspective, but I'm now feeding back on a lot of other different disciplines. So it's understanding how to do that in a way that's going to be helpful to the overarching, objectives. I'm also, maybe alluding back to COVID, I'm also reading The Great Hamburger Book at the moment, which is a massive tour across the US of the best hamburgers to make. So I am properly on each end of the spectrum right now with books. The one thing I would advise people to do, though, is I'm a big podcast and a big sort of online reader, articles and so on, is to actually read like Harvard Business Review and leadership articles on there. They're written very well, they're quite clear, and they go through lots of the principles that we've been talking about. And it seems a bit odd to say to a group of designers and creatives to read HBR, but bear with me. a lot of the stuff on there is not is actually way more relevant than you would imagine. So I'd recommend that.
I like that as well, Lauren. The HBR books, they're really small, really thin little books that are very
really nice and thin.
Yeah, so you can feel really good about reading hundreds of them, and they're in every airport bookstore. So if there's always a section for those, and if you're choosing between Stephen King and that, I love you, Stephen, but go for the HBR stuff if you've got a short flight.
Yeah,
exactly.
The thinner the better, rather than stretching out the 1.2 to 196 pages is always good.
Yeah.
Kevin, your book recommendation?
Yeah, so this may come as a shock to all of you and maybe disappointing. I don't read as much design related books, partially because I don't hate what I do. I love what I do, but it's all varies. You can't normalize design thinking or design practice just because someone wrote a book, and that's my experience, because I've gone through all the different big major companies, and that's because of, I don't know, it's luck, and because of how it molded my view of design, which is very different from people who come from agency side of the world or going back and forth between those two worlds, which I always envy, which I never have the courage to jump to the agency side, although I wanted to one time. But because I'm being molded by the corporate design and the role that design plays or has to play within the corporate world, my view has been quite rigid in some way, which is good and bad. But I tend to pick up a lot of business innovation, business strategy books, because in that, what I used to try to do is try to find the role of design within that context of what this author is trying to say. So like, for example, like The Myth of Innovation, written by Scott Berkun. He's long time my colleague back in the days of my eBay days and PayPal. But, not that I'm saying that's for example, but, I read it and I find all these areas of opportunity as a designer. Oh, for that problem that he's trying to, demystify, where does design come in and fit in as a missing puzzle? And I think that sometimes it is a very much a creative approach, but what I'm trying to say is that for those who are looking for books, you have to really know what you're looking for. Why do you want to first pick up a design handbook? And you got to really ask yourself hard question. What problem are you trying to solve for yourself? Are you just trying to be inspired? Then probably okay, do that. But are you really trying to pick up a technique that actually helps you to find the problem for your own organization you're facing? Then it may not be the best, because that person, author that who you're about to read from, did not walk the same path as you did. So you can't really look at someone's journey saying, oh, I can do that. This is where the biggest mistake happens. But instead, when you look at it from business context, which business contexts are pretty similar, there are a bunch of KPIs, as Jack talked about. There's a metrics. You cannot get away from it. And there is a bureaucratic process. There are always politics, right? There's an elephant in the room. At the same time, there's someone who's been isolated from the conversation. So when you are kind of in that mode and try to look at it from a design lens, sometimes I often find the most practical tips that I take myself away with, that I happen to then apply from the role that I play. So I think that's the one thing that I will suggest as well, is then look for business, like strategy or innovation books. See how you can fit that into your own muscles that you want to build, whether from design or creative in general.
Excellent. I'll just add mine as well before handing back over to Luke. I'm a big fan of classics, because I think if something was written 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago and is still true, it's likely to be good and true. So things that have principles in them rather than diagnostics or current trends or whatever. So one of these books or several of these books that I read are from David Ogilvy. So there's Ogilvy on advertising and Confessions of an Advertising Man, and various other things written by him as well. if you take the 1950s, 60s context of it out, so that's mainly the sexism within it and the way that it's written, a lot of the truth that comes through that means that even in the the Madison Avenue of the 1960s, it was effectively user-centered design, and him bringing that in with various of his collaborators as well. So there's some really interesting stuff there. Also, a book that inspired me early on to think deeper about design in general was The Humane Interface by Jeff Raskin. Just an awesome book, which takes a different way than you may have already thought about some aspects of design into that. It's a classic and a good read. One for the geeks. Cool. Well, thank you very much, fellow panelists. That was excellent. Some fantastic insights there. And thank you, audience, for your questions. Sorry we can get through them all, but hopefully we did you justice there.